Hi, I'm here with appraiser Tom Horn from Alabama. He's a licensed appraiser, and we're going to talk about appraisals today. So, welcome, Tom. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me today.
That's great. So, Tom, why don't you just start out by telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Okay. As you said, I'm a residential real estate appraiser. I like to point that out. I don't really do commercial work, but I've been appraising for about 34 years now. Time kind of chips away. I was thinking about it the other
Wow.
day, but yeah,
Yeah.
about 34 years. And I started in Florida, the Panhandle of Florida. Did appraised there for about 4 or 5 years, and then I moved to Alabama, the Birmingham area. And I've been appraising here where I concentrate in residential appraisals, mobile homes, condos, single family homes, land, that type of thing. So I've been doing that in this area. Yeah.
So you appraise for banks as well as do appraisal work, maybe for estates or maybe pre-listing type appraisals.
Exactly. Yeah. I do
Okay.
a combination of work. I do work for, mortgage companies and banks, which is your
Okay.
traditional type of appraisal. I also do non-traditional, which would be appraisals done for estate settlement, for divorce work, or anything like that, maybe for insurance purposes. I do work for real estate agents if they are maybe having a hard time coming up with a value on a
Yeah.
property they're selling, so they have just an extra set of eyes to look at and something to go on there. So yeah, I do that type of work as well.
Okay. The first question I have for you, what is an appraisal? What's the purpose of an appraisal?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things about an appraisal, or at least within the definition that I consider, is it's an unbiased professional opinion of value. The appraiser is really the only unbiased person in the transaction, and it's not nothing wrong to be biased because a real estate agent, they have an interest in wanting to sell the property. A buyer and a seller have their own interest too, and that's fine. But that's why they get the appraiser involved, is that so that an unbiased person can come in and report on the true market value of the property, relative to the market data that's provided.
So, and I think it's important to note market value is what you could sell it for that particular day you do the appraisal.
Exactly, yeah, and it's
Yeah.
based on what other comparable properties are selling for or actually listed for. Whenever I do an appraisal, I include closed sales as well as active listings and pending sales. I consider pending sales to be some of the best market data that there is, as long as everything has, been done on the property, like if the appraisal for that property has been performed and it meets the market value and
Right.
all, and then if they've got their financing and just everything else, and they're just waiting for it to close, that's the best indication of value right there. So I always like to include pending sales as well as, like I said, the closed and the active listings.
Okay, great. So, so as a real estate agent, I do what's called the comparative market analysis. So, could you kind of tell us what the difference is between a CMA, the comparative market analysis, versus the appraisal? I know I try to follow some of the standards that you do, but there definitely is a difference.
Right. Yeah. Well, typically the CMA is performed by the agent and the appraisal is performed by the appraiser. The CMA does not go into as much detail as an appraisal does. A lot of times, some agents may be able to develop adjustment amounts. And when I say adjustment amounts, it's the pluses and minuses that we perform on the comparable sales to get it more in line with the subject property to get a reliable range of value for that. So we come up with dollar adjustments based on that feature's contributory value to the overall price of the property. Whereas in a CMA, the agents don't typically do that. Not to say that some of them might not have that knowledge and do that, but the appraisal is just a little bit more in depth, and it's done by, like I said, by the appraiser, whereas the CMA is typically done by the agent.
Mhm. So, and you pointed out it is an unbiased value. I mean, even an agent does have some sort of bias because they get a commission off of it.
Exactly.
So, not that that should make a difference, but yeah, it is an unbiased opinion. And I think it's important to note that you have much stricter guidelines that you need to follow than, say, an agent does. I can be a little looser, and sometimes there's properties, there's just a certain neighborhood you can get more money for it type of thing. And so you follow a stricter set of guidelines where I can be a little bit more interpretive.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we have certain guidelines that we have to fulfill through like maybe Fannie Mae, which is one layer of guidelines, as well as guidelines that a bank or a mortgage company might have. So we have to make sure that the report conforms to their guidelines as well as like the comparable sales. So a lot of times an agent might give me some sales that they used in their CMA, which I always ask for because I always like to know where they're coming from in their pricing strategy. And some of those sales may be a little bit older than I would typically want to use. And if we're in a fast moving market, older sales, we probably don't want to concentrate on those. We want to use the most recent sales. So I
Yeah.
will sift through the sales that they provide to see if if they would be good to use in the report. So that's something we look at there as far as
But
guidelines go.
say you have, a certain, what, three houses to use as comparables, and maybe an agent provides you a comparable that's 9 months old, but it's a house in the same neighborhood, two doors down. Would that hold a little bit more weight for you, even though it's older?
It could, depending on the market we're in.
Yeah.
If it's a fast-moving market, like I said, and we're seeing faster depreciation, it may not be relevant, but at least it can still give us a snapshot and let us know where the market is going.
Yeah. 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 I think that's good.
Yeah.
That leads me to our next question, which is, how good is an appraisal good for? If you could
Technically
answer it.
speaking, an appraisal is only good for the day you do it. I mean,
Yeah, I
most people.
think that's important to know because, I'll show up at a listing appointment and someone pulls out an appraisal from, 5 years ago. And I'm like, this has absolutely no bearing on what your house is worth today. And, now they probably wouldn't do it. But, back in 2010, they would definitely do it if they had an appraisal from 2005. I mean, our market up here lost about 30% across the board
Right.
between 2005 and 2010.
Right.
So I think it is important to note the appraisal is technically really good just the day that you do it, though the banks say it's good for 90 days, I think.
Right, yeah, and I think that might vary by the bank.
Okay.
I've 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 heard as much as up to 6 months, something like that.
Okay.
But again, it's a situational type thing depending on the market you're in and that type of thing. So I think we have to look at it on a case by case basis. If you have a very stable market, it may be good. The property values may not have changed much. But again, like I said, if you have a fast moving market, either increasing or decreasing, it may not be relevant to the current value of the home.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about how you determine value. I know, again, I show up at listing appointments and, someone shot, well, I have 5 acres of land and, I'm comparing it to, half acre or 1 acre lots because I can't find anything that has, they have power lines going across it. It's up a hill and, they think they're sitting on $400,000 or, you know, I, I had one crazy seller. They had soundproofed their basement. It was a for sale by owner, and they just went on and on and on. They spent a ton of money on it, and I'm like, this has no value. It's creepy.
Yeah.
So if you can touch upon what you as an appraiser are looking, the big ones, what you're looking for, and how you break down the value and in the criteria that you're looking for.
Sure. So, in the appraisal world, there's three recognized approaches to value. There's a sales comparison approach. That's what most people are familiar with, the comps, that they talk about. There's the cost approach, which would include, the current value of land as well as construction costs, and we also factor in depreciation there. Then we also have the income approach, which looks at the incoming capability or the income producing capabilities of the
Yeah.
property. So depending on what type of property it is, we're going to concentrate on one or more of those approaches. If a property is not in an area where there's a lot of rentals or anything like that, the income approach may not be very relevant. Or if we have a house that we're appraising that's 100 years old, the cost approach may not be relevant. So we would concentrate on, the other two approaches, or maybe just the sales comparison approach. And really, the sales comparison approach in a lot of appraisers' minds is typically the most indicative of the value of the property because it's a reflection of what buyers are, what's going through their mind. And when they're looking for a house to buy, they might go out and look at some other homes and compare them. Say, well, this one has a pool, but this other one doesn't have a pool, so the pool's worth X amount. So and that's we're trying to mimic what the buyers are going through, what they're going through in their mind in order to come up with the value based on the contributory value of the different features of the home.
So, I mean, so let's talk about some of the major value indicators there. Location, obviously, size, style, condition. So we just talked about square footage. So, how much does square footage weigh into the value of a property?
Well, I believe that the square footage is the biggest mover of value in a property. That is along with maybe additional land, if it's enough to count.
Hmm.
Because if maybe if we're appraising a property that maybe has 1 acre and we're looking at a comp that has 10 or 15 acres, that's going to be a difference there too. But finished gross living area, what the appraiser calls it, which is heated and cooled square footage, typically is the biggest mover of value. Then like you said, there's location that can have a big influence on value, because you can have two identical homes but in different areas, and one worth a lot more than another, based on its location. So we do have to look at that as well.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So I would say location and the physical attributes of the property. And most agents, I always talk to them when they're asking me about picking comparables for a property. I say, well, you might want to think about talking with buyers of different properties and just look at what they ask about, because that's the things that they're concerned about and what is probably moving the needle on value for them. If they look at 4 or 5 different items that a home might have that might move value, like maybe a pool, or again, maybe location close to something like a school system, something like that, that's definitely what we look at.
So, how far away should a comparable be from the subject property?
That is a good question, and it's one that I think a lot of agents are confused about, because honestly, Fannie Mae says that appraisers can go as far as they want to for comparables. However, we have to account for any differences. And, just because we can go real far away for comps doesn't mean we always should, but we're given that option if we have to, because in some rural areas where there's not a lot of sales, we might have to go several miles away. However, if you're in an urban area where, there are a lot of sales within several blocks, of course, you don't want to go several miles away. But if you're in an area where maybe there's not any good recent sales, I always, tell the agents, always look in what we consider a competitive market area. And what that is, it's just another area that a buyer would look in if that particular home where they're looking now is not available. So it would include the same school system, maybe the same city, maybe similar distances to work centers and that type of thing. So, yeah. So it could, I mean, most agents think that you can't go more than a mile away. But I always tell people, I always look in the subdivision of the neighborhood first. But if you can't find any there, it's okay to go a little bit further away if the particular neighborhood is very similar and a similar school system and within that competitive market area, like I just described.
Okay. Around here, you know, I try to stay within, a mile when I pull my comps, but, some towns it's very hard to do that. And I have to look at the whole town. Very rarely do I have to bounce out of town, except for maybe multifamily. Sometimes I'll have a multifamily in a town where there just isn't multifamilies, and then I have to look outside of the town. But that's what I
Right.
run
Yeah.
into here. Yeah. So what, when homeowners are preparing for the appraisal, will a messy house impact the value? That's a big question. Do I have to clean up for the appraiser?
Yeah, that is one of the biggest questions I get from homeowners, and I always try to let them know that no, it will not. A lot of people are busy; they can't put their laundry up, and I'm telling them, that's fine. I'm not looking at, housekeeping. I'm looking at the structure of the home.
Yeah, you're not appraising. Just like when I go to prepare a house, it's like, remove the curtains, remove that throw rug. I mean, we're not selling their stuff. We're looking at the physicality of the house.
Exactly. Yeah.
And we want the buyers to see that. So, and then also that kind of leads to another question. when you do an appraisal, is it all right for the seller to be at the home?
It is. I always like for them to be there because I have questions. I always like to ask them about any updates or renovations that they've had
Okay.
and or, anything like that. So them being there is helpful. Sometimes you might get into a situation where the homeowner is trying to influence the value of the property as we appraise it. And that's not a good situation, but as long as they're there to provide just helpful information about the home itself, that's perfectly fine. Yeah.
Okay. You cut out for a minute.
Okay.
Okay. So, so they can provide relevant information that you could use in the appraisal is what you're telling us.
Exactly. Yes. Uh-huh.
Okay. And so now let's talk about, recent renovations. You run into sellers who, just redid their kitchen and spent $100,000, probably way more than they should have. And, they want to try to recoup that $100,000 and maybe an extra 20. How realistic is that?
It a lot of times is not very realistic because I think
Okay.
most homeowners have an unrealistic expectation of how much value improvements add. You know, that's where we get into the cost versus value scenario, whereas some improvements may contribute more to the overall value of the home. And, we always hear about the kitchens and bathrooms. That's where I find that you get the most bang for your buck in improvements, as somebody may put a new roof on their home and they spend $20,000-$30,000 for that, and they want to get that back out of it. Whereas that particular part of the home is supposed to be there anyway, and it's supposed to be in good shape. So you typically don't get a return on that like you would a kitchen or a bathroom.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think when you're talking about renovations, the thing that I run into is people overdo it on renovations and then go sell their house 3 years later. You have to decide, am I doing the renovation for myself or am I doing it to add value to the house? Because there's a very different way to go about it when it comes at, like wine coolers in a, average priced home. That's not really going to add any value, but you might spend $2,500 on it. And things
Exactly.
like
Yeah.
that. And
Yeah.
you got to look at the price point. If you're doing a $4 million home, you probably expect a wine cooler, but not in a $500,000 home.
Right.
I always tell people, before you embark on a large renovation, talk to your real estate agent and see, can I get the value out of this? If you're there for 20 years, it doesn't make a difference. But how many people do you run into that did a major renovation and 2 years later are trying to sell? And
Right.
they're taking a bath on it. So,
You're probably definitely going to get more value further on down the line. And I always tell people also, if they want to do major renovations, they can always get an appraisal to determine what the value might be after the renovations to see if it's
that's
going to be
a great
within,
idea as well.
yeah, if
For
it's with,
for what's a private appraisal cost? Around $500 these days.
yeah, it just varies depending on where it's at.
If you're talking about spending $100,000, a $500 appraisal isn't much to help protect your investment. So
Exactly.
it's a great idea. So what factors can cause your home to appraise for less than expected?
Well, there's numerous factors such as the condition of the property. We also look at the location of the property, the functional utility of the property. On older homes, I've seen situations where you have to pass through a room to get to a bedroom. That's a functional problem right there. So that impacts the value of it. Maybe a location next to an interstate or something like that could have an adverse effect on the value. So, just different things like that. The condition of it, a home in better condition, of course, is going to, bring more value as well.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, there's a bunch of things like that, the functional utility. So here, you know, we're talking about some of the oldest housing stock in the country, in the Boston area. And, then we have new homes and say, you're trying to compare a 1950 colonial to a colonial built 10 years ago. There's definitely a functional obsolescence to these colonial, unless
Yeah.
there's been a major renovation done.
Well, and that makes it even more important to do the comparables accurately, because in some areas that may be desirable, because if the home is is being, kept in its original state then, and somebody may want to purchase it like that. So it depends on the area. So in one area, you might have a functional problem. In another area, it may be typical. So you really have to look at the market it's in.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about around here. I don't know what it's like in Alabama, but below grade living space. Again, for me, I've got people who spend a ton of money on a basement renovation, and then they're shocked when I can't give them the same square foot value that I could for above grade living area. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. We get the same questions down here, but I always tell people, from my experience, only in rare instances, the value of a basement is less than, or at least how much it contributes to the overall value of the property is less than what we call above grade living area. So that's going to bring less value. So it's important to keep that in mind whenever they're making the improvements and to determine how much they want to spend on it. They need to
Mhm.
look about how much value it's going to add. In some markets, like if you're on a lake and you have some room finished area below grade in the basement area, that's more typical there because it usually faces the lake and the quality of construction is the same as the upper level. So you might not have any decrease in the contributory value of that basement area, but most other areas usually get less for the basement than you do for the upper level.
Yeah, yeah. So around here, we a lot of basements are just completely underground. We do give value to some finished rooms down there, but unless there's windows and doors opening up to the back, then it's far less than the above grade finished value.
Yeah, it's the same here. We call that a walkout basement where you
Hmm.
can walk out and, like you said, it has windows and so forth. And also, as far as being able to classify a room as a bedroom in the basement, it has to have, access to the outside. So if it doesn't have a window or something like that, it usually can't technically be called
Yep.
a bedroom. But so that's something we have to look at as well.
Yes. Yeah. So, what can a seller do to prepare their home for an appraisal to get the maximum value?
I always recommend that they, you know, as far as, just, like, preparing it, like, for cosmetically, so to speak, I mean, always clean, make sure it's straight. I mean, we talk about the laundry and the housekeeping and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's not really what I'm talking about, but if there is maybe some, what we call deferred maintenance, a broken glass or something needs repair, it's always good to fix that.
Oh.
Make sure it's, everything is fine like that. Sometimes people will, do a little, work in the yard so the curb appeal will be a little bit better.
Mhm.
Those are some of the cosmetic type stuff that, it doesn't require a lot of money, but it can make a bigger difference in the presentation of the home anyway. But beyond that, just having information available for the appraiser,
Okay.
such as home improvements or renovations, if they've done that, anything like that, that they can provide the appraiser would be very helpful
Okay.
for us to do our job.
Okay. Well, we're getting about 25 minutes here, Tom. So I'm going to wrap it up. I want
Okay.
to thank you. I'll have Tom's information down below. If you're in the Birmingham, Alabama area and you need an appraisal, you can reach Tom. Tom, again, thank you very much. Some great information here. And hopefully we can have you on again in the future because there's a lot more to be talked about.
Oh, yeah. Appreciate
So.
the opportunity to be here, and I'm here for in the future if you need it.